Welcome back to State of the Union. I'm Jake Tapper. 7 people are dead in London after a van plowed into a crowd of people, followed by a stabbing rampage at a restaurant. President Trump used the event to renew his call for a travel ban. He tweeted, quote, "We need to be smart, vigilant, and tough. We need the courts to give us back our rights. We need the travel ban as an extra level of safety," unquote. Let's talk with our panel about it. We have with us former Virginia Attorney General Republican Ken Cuccinelli, former Democratic Governor of Michigan Jennifer Granholm, editor of the conservative Weekly Standard Bill Kristol, and MoveOn.org senior advisor Karine Jean-Pierre. Thanks so much, one and all, for being here. We appreciate it. Ken, let me start with you. Some people find it inappropriate for the president to be talking about a travel ban immediately after the attack. He did eventually, of course, go on to offer thoughts, prayers, condolences, offer to help Theresa May as much as possible. But is there anything wrong with what he did?
No, I don't think so. I mean, and look, they're in the middle of a legal contest over this. I think the courts are violating the separation of powers, invading the prerogatives of the executive branch pretty clearly. And there is a political element. He's trying to make his case to the public. But there's also a question. Courts can decide how fast to consider these things. Right now, they're trying to get the Supreme Court to let the policy stand pending the outcome of litigation. Well, things like this incident can, and we'll never really know because it won't be in the briefs or the orders, can affect judges, they're human beings too, to get them to speed these things up. So it can affect the process by which this is all considered.
Okay, so he tweets about the travel ban. He doesn't know where the people are residents of.
Understood.
He doesn't know anything about it. The rule number one of being...
He might know something. I mean, he's the president. He has access to information. But
well, okay. None of it has, even to this moment, been made public or even said that they know anything about the identities of the people. But I appreciate you giving him the benefit of the doubt on it.
That's my job.
Rule number one of being the commander-in-chief of the largest and the most important nation on earth, I would say, is that you do not jump to conclusions. You don't attack the mayor of London who is going through the middle of this. And you don't act defensively, which is so he had 3 tweets that I think were completely off. One that was on. The one about the travel ban, which was the first tweet out of the box instead of offering condolences and help. The second one attacking the mayor of London. And the third one being defensive about guns, saying, you notice this is about knives. Of course, one might say that if the people had AK-47s, a lot more people would have been killed. But nonetheless, those instincts of his are totally off the mark.
And let me ask you, Bill, just because one of the interesting things that the governor just pointed out is we don't know who this is, and a lot of the terrorists, I think maybe entirely the terrorists that have struck London and Manchester in the previous month, and we don't know about this account, is that they were nationals, they were British. And the truth of the matter is homegrown terrorism is a bigger threat here in the United States, at least so far. And so far in the UK it has been. The travel ban wouldn't necessarily have impacted any of those attacks.
Though I guess homegrown terrorists who have been in touch with or traveled to, I think in the case of the Manchester terrorists, to Libya and stuff, there's often more international connections than the people who say, oh, it's just self-radicalization, say. But it's also the case that these are not people who are flying in often to do it. They're locals, they're citizens. Theresa May made an excellent statement earlier this morning in London, about a minute and a half long. You can see it online. I recommend to everyone to see it. I recommend to President Trump that he watch. This is how a serious leader makes a tough statement, not a politically correct statement. She talks about Islamist extremism. She says we have to get tougher in denying these extremist safe spaces, both on the internet and at home. So she implies a fairly tough law and order stance in terms of asking Muslim communities to do more in Britain. That's obviously a problem with the homegrown terrorists. But also a responsible and sober statement, not the kind of bombast that we get from Trump. So I hope Donald Trump and others take a look at what Theresa May said.
Well, I would say this. I hope that the Supreme Court was watching the tweets this morning, because he basically confirmed what all of us have been saying, is that, oh yeah, this is actually a ban. And that's what the lower courts confirmed and said it was a ban. And it's a dangerous one at that. The other thing, too, I would say is, like, look, and I'm not really trying to be funny here, but this is in true honesty. Like, I really wish someone, in the name of national security, that someone will just change the password on his Twitter account, and so he could be locked out, because what he is doing is erratic, it's dangerous, and it's also just false.
Jake, you made a point a moment ago about homegrown versus the foreign connection. And look, the president can't take away rights here within the country, all right? But the folks that the travel ban is aimed at have no rights. They have no rights under our Constitution.
To come into the United States.
They have no standing.
Right.
They have no, and there's no reason that we should let folks in those categories in, by the way, identified by the last administration as heightened security areas, risks for heightened security. So there is a difference. You can't just equate the homegrown problem, which is frankly much more complicated, with the contacts, the foreign contacts, and the opportunities for terrorism.
I hear what you're saying. I guess my point is the threat is actually greater from homegrown terrorists in the UK and the United States, according to national security officials in both countries. And so the travel ban, it doesn't argue against it. It's not a solution.
But that's not a reason not to address that part of the problem. And he's in a better position using executive authority to address that part of the problem. You can't, again, the Constitution protects the rights of folks who are already here in the United States, and that's a different and much more complicated and long-term challenge.
Yeah, it's just kind of like the guy looking for his keys under the streetlight that's on, as opposed to the one where he lost his keys. I mean, if the problem is over here, that's all I'm saying, Governor.
No, I totally agree. And the Obama administration identified these countries as places that they don't want Americans to travel to. We don't know that any of these people are relevant in any way to the travel ban, which is the problem, is that he has not narrowed the scope of his solution to the problem. And that's, I think, what the Supreme... Well, we'll see what the Supreme Court does. He's got a justice now that might tip it the other way.
It's a small number of countries. The people from those countries have been involved in terrorism in this country. This is not irrelevant. It is relevant.
Well, I'm not saying it's irrelevant.
It's just not complete.
Yeah, I think you take my point. But I want to turn to the FBI director testifying on Thursday. Bill, take a listen to what President Trump had to say about what he wants from Comey's testimony.
All I want is for Comey to be honest, and I hope he will be, and I'm sure he will be, I hope.
Now, Comey is set to testify on Thursday, assuming President Trump does not successfully invoke executive privilege and block him from testifying. First of all, do you think he should try to stop him from testifying?
No, and I think there's you'd have almost no chance of succeeding. I mean, James Comey is a private citizen as long as he doesn't reveal classified information. If you invited Comey to come on this panel right now, he could do it. If Congress invites him to testify in public, he can do it.
We'd love to have him.
And plenty of cabinet officials and staff have left administrations and spoken about maybe they shouldn't. That's another question. But they've had the right to speak about conversations they've had with the president and so forth. He won't talk about the FBI investigation. One thing, incidentally, though, we don't have an FBI director. We have an acting director, and I'm sure he's competent, and the FBI can do its thing without having a director. But it just shows how reckless, in this respect, I do agree. That's the right word. Donald Trump fired an FBI director without having someone else in place. And here we are, 3 weeks later, there's still no candidate. It wasn't a very prudent thing to do. Just for for governance reasons alone, let aside whatever other motives you might have.
Karine, let me ask you a question. Are you ever concerned, as a Democratic progressive activist, are you ever concerned that the base of the Democratic Party have far higher expectations for what's going to come of this investigation into either Russian collusion or obstruction of justice than what is actually going to come? Does that ever bother you or worry you?
That's a really good question. I've actually never thought of that question. It's a good one to think about, but I think it's like a 5-alarm fire, you know? It's like it just doesn't stop. Every day we hear from media reports something else that has, you know, either it's leading to a cover-up or potential collusion. And so I think we're in a place with Comey, and just to talk about the executive privilege, Donald Trump waived his right to executive privilege because he talked about it publicly. He talked about a potential tape. So I don't think he can even, if he were to do that, he can't. But here we are in a situation where we have a former FBI director who's going to be under oath in front of Congress. And if he actually says and confirms what the media reports have been saying, we could be dealing with a constitutional crisis.
You had Senator Warner on here earlier. And you asked him a similar question, and he said, look, there's a lot of things that look smoky here, but no fire yet. And that's still true. That is still true. And look, we all know the Russians have been meddling in our elections as long as they've been able to do it. Technology has given them a better ability to do that now at a lower cost. Does that mean there's collusion? There's no evidence of that yet.
Very clear.
Well, all I can say is, you know, there's a lot of smoke because each day there are pieces of wood that are added to the fire. And what Mark Warner also said is that one of the things they're going to ask is why Donald Trump, on the day that Jim Comey announced that he was doing an investigation of Russian collusion, calls Dan Coats, head of the Director of National Intelligence, and says, can you push back on that? And then calls Admiral Rogers and says the same thing. All of these things, then he fires all of these things add up to not just smoke, but potentially a bonfire. We'll see.
I appreciate your continued use of the metaphor.
I'm
That was
trying.
very, that was impressive. Very, very skillful.
Just kind of
Thanks one and all for being here.